Hey everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Percy Jackson Son of Poseidon podcast. So this episode is going to be part 1 of the review for The Lightning Thief. Now I'll be doing these reviews for each book in 3 parts. The first part will be reviewing the first half, or half-ish of the book, and then the second part will be the last half of the book, and then the third part will be an overall review of the book as a whole, the narrative, the characters, and everything. So in this part, we're just kind of go over, summarize a little bit of the first half of the book, and kind of talk about some of the things that stand out. And then in the second part, we'll do the same thing for the second half. And then in the third part, we'll just go over the whole book and my thoughts as a whole. And so that's how the podcast is going to go. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. And I hope you guys enjoy my review of Percy Jackson. So we're going to start with The Lightning Thief. So I remember I first got into Percy Jackson when I was probably about 20 years old. And I would go to Target and I would see The Lightning Thief at the book section of Target. And every time I went to Target, I would keep going to it, and I was just so intrigued by it. I read the back cover and I kind of read the first few pages, and I just really wanted that book to read. So I ended up getting it for Christmas that year, and I read the book pretty quickly and I loved it. And then so I just went out and started buying the rest of the books, and it took me probably 2, maybe 3 years to finish the whole series, just because I had to buy the books kind of slowly. And I don't think the 5th book had come out by the time I read the first book. So I really loved the 5 books and the series and the characters and the story. And I kind of became a fan of Percy Jackson. And then also I watched the movies, which are very different, but I still like the movies as well. And so I am very excited for the television show. So that's why I'm doing a reread of the books. And that's why I decided to do the podcast, because I kind of wanted to dive a little bit deeper into Percy Jackson and the world and kind of get my thoughts and share my opinions out there. So, the first book, The Lightning Thief. So, we start off with Percy, and sort of the first 5 chapters or so kind of set up Percy as like this troubled kid. He gets kicked out of schools, and, he's, kind of a problem child. He has ADHD and dyslexia. And mom has to ship him off to a new boarding school every year. And we get introduced to his friend Grover, who we later learn is his protector. And we get introduced to his favorite teacher, Mr. Brunner. And then we get Mrs. Dodds, who then attacks him because she's really a fury. And then we see his home life, and he's, got this terrible stepfather, Gabe. And it's not really well. He treats his mom really bad, but he loves his mom. His mom's super sweet. And so after the school year ends, he goes to stay with his mom for the summer. And his mom decides to take him to a little mini vacation in Long Island. But Grover shows up, and they get chased by a Minotaur. And so Percy has to go take refuge in Camp Half-Blood. And so that's where we kind of get introduced into the world of, I'm not sure if there's a universe world term, but the world of the Greek gods and everything. We see that at Camp Half-Blood. So Percy ends up defeating the Minotaur, but his mom gets captured, but he thinks she may have been dead. And so he gets taken to Camp Half-Blood to recover. And that's when we kind of get introduced to this idea that he's actually a part of this magical world of the Greek gods. And that he himself is a demigod, the son of one of the Greek gods. And so we meet Mr. Brunner, who is actually Chiron, who is a centaur, half man, half horse. And then we learn that Grover is a satyr, half man, half goat. And we also get introduced to a few other characters. We kind of meet Annabeth, and we meet Luke and Dionysus, the god of wine, and Percy's just kind of taking all of this in. So it's a great way to introduce us and slowly get us into the world. We see Percy's sort of regular normal life, and then we flip that on its head and take him to Camp Half-Blood, and we get introduced to all of this stuff as Percy gets introduced to it. So that's really good. So I really like the setup that we get in these first 5 chapters. It fits the sort of traditional hero's arc where we meet Percy, experience his normal life, and then take that away from him. And so we also get a glimpse of, we learn about all the strange things that has happened to Percy throughout his life, which is a sign that he is a demigod. And then he's attacked by Mrs. Dodds at school, but nobody really remembers her, so that kind of feels strange and weird to him. And there's really not a whole lot that happens other than it's just kind of a few setup chapters. And at this point in the books, Percy is 12 years old, and I think Grover says he's in 6th grade, which seems very young, but that's kind of around the same age that Harry Potter was. I think Harry Potter was like 11 in that first book. But this book is definitely a lot more kid-friendly, and it's also told from Percy's point of view. It's first person, rather than the Harry Potter books are third person, limited to Harry's view, but I think that little bit of distance kind of allows for a little bit more of a different perspective. Like with being in Percy's perspective, we're getting the view of a 12-year-old. And it feels like the view of a 12-year-old. And so it's not as kind of, I would say, mature in the way the Harry Potter books are, where I think adults can really read Harry Potter and get a lot out of it. This is definitely skewed for more middle grade, but you can still read it as an adult. There is a lot of great stuff here, obviously. But yeah, this first book definitely sort of follows a little bit of path of the first Harry Potter book, and especially these early chapters. And then we get into Camp Half-Blood, chapters 5 through 10, where we really kind of learn about the Olympic gods. So Camp Half-Blood has 12 cabins for the 12 Olympic gods. Hades is not an Olympic god, he doesn't get a cabin. So Percy gets a tour around Camp Half-Blood, and we learn that he learns all the campers are demigods, and that, they're usually a child of one of the 12 Olympic gods, except for, I think, 2 of the gods. I think Hera and Hestia, maybe, or Demeter, one of those. They don't have children? Or is it Artemis? I'm not sure if Apollo and Artemis have cabins. But 2 of them don't actually have children, so their cabins are always empty. And then Zeus and Poseidon's cabins are empty, because we learned that they made a pact with Hades not to have any more children after World War II. And we learned that World War II was caused by a clash of the gods. So, but you have to be claimed by your parent in order to get assigned to a cabin. And if you're not claimed by your parent and you're unclaimed, then you go to cabin 11, which is the cabin of Hermes. So that's where Percy starts out before we figure out who his actual parent is. And this chapter sort of sets up a lot about the Greek gods. So we learn Zeus, Poseidon, Hades took a pact, but Zeus broke his pact and had a child 17 years ago. But Hades found out, sent the hounds after her, and Zeus turned her into the pine tree. And this is something that's going to be set up later in the books series as well. And so we kind of learn a little bit about that. And so you sort of start to suspect that has something to do with Percy. And then we learn that Percy kind of has this ability to control water. So they're kind of leading these little hints a few chapters before we actually figure out who Percy's godfather is. And so Percy is sort of getting introduced to life at Camp Half-Blood, doing some training and everything. And, people keep bringing up this idea as he might be a child of one of the big 3. So, obviously it's not very hard to figure out who his dad is, but it's kind of a cool reveal because during the battle, capture the flag battle, Percy learns that the water can heal him and gives him strength and energy, and so he manages to fend off Clarice and her friends, the Ares cabin, daughter of Ares, who's has been bullying and picking on Percy, he manages to overtake her, and also he is attacked by a hellhound, and then he goes to the water, and then he is claimed by his father, Poseidon, with a glowing trident over his head. And it's a really cool moment, I think, in the book, and it's kind of a way to show that Percy does have this kind of innate ability in him, and that he is powerful. They do mention that a child of the big three, Zeus, Poseidon, or Hades, is more powerful than a normal demigod. And so this is a great scene to show that. Even though Percy's not super trained, he just has that innate power within him that he can take out Clarice, somebody who's very trained, and that the water can heal him and give him energy and strength. And so I think it's a really great scene, and I just kind of like the idea of a glowing trident over his head as well. And then this is also where we learn that Zeus's lightning bolt was stolen during the winter solstice, and that it has to be returned by the end of the summer solstice, and that Zeus blames Poseidon, and he thinks that Percy's the thief. But Chiron suspects that Hades is actually behind it. And actually, none of these are right. But so Percy needs a quest, so he seeks out counsel from the Oracle of Delphi, which is that's also going to play later in the books as well. So Percy takes Grover and Annabeth with him to aid him on his quest. And Luke gives Percy a pair of Hermes' winged flying shoes and everything. And then Chiron gives Percy this pen that turns into a sword, Riptide, or Anaklumus, which is actually a gift from Poseidon. So Percy has got his friend, he's got his tools, and then they also tell Percy that his mom, Sally, married his stepdad, Gabe, because he has such a repugnant odor that it masks the smell of Percy being a demigod. And so she did it to actually protect Percy so that monsters weren't attracted to him and came hunting for him. And that's why he has to go off to school every year also, is to kind of help protect him. So Percy kind of gets a better understanding of why his life has been the way it has been his whole life, is because he's part demigod and monsters are just naturally attracted to him, which puts him in a lot of danger all the time. And so then the trio go on, start their journey to the quest, and they get on a Greyhound bus out of New York, and then they end up getting attacked by the Furies, who also look like Mrs. Dodds, on the bus. And then one of the cool things is that Annabeth has an invisible cap, and so when she puts the cap on, she turns invisible, so she gives the cap to Percy so he can turn invisible and kind of escape the Furies. So these two chapters sort of establish Percy as the chosen hero, being the son of Poseidon. He's given a quest, which hasn't been done in years at Camp Half-Blood since Luke's quest. And so it just introduces us to the world of the demigods, to Half-Blood, to this sort of magical Greek stuff going on, and explains why Percy is special in this world and why he's special among the demigods and with the Greek gods. And it sets up that what his quest is going to be. Zeus thinks he stole the lightning bolt, but they believe it was Hades, so his quest is to go to Hades. But really, Percy wants to go to Hades because he thinks he can get his mother back from the underworld because she thinks that she's dead. So it's a really good few chapters, and it ends with, them going off on their quests and everything. And I just really like the world that we build at Camp Half-Blood, and just sort of dropping the little bits of information as we go, like about the big three and about Percy and everything. So I really like all of that. And then the sort of middle chapters of the book are about Percy and the trio, but it's mostly about Percy trying to prove himself as a hero. And the trio are fighting monsters, and they have to learn to work together. Annabeth and Percy have this sort of almost antagonistic nature in the beginning because she's the daughter of Athena and he's the son of Poseidon, and so their parents did not get along, but she has to learn to put that aside so that she can work with Percy and they can end up being friends. And so this middle section is them learning to grow as a team and fight monsters and really sort of prove themselves on this quest. And so they run into Medusa, who is running this garden statue emporium, and at first they're kind of, Percy's really seduced by all the food and stuff that Medusa is providing them, but they slowly start to put together. Grover sees a statue that looks just like his Uncle Ferdinand. Medusa's dropping small little clues that Annabeth picks up on, so they slowly put together that this is Medusa and they need to get out of there. And so I think Percy uses Riptide to behead her, and then he ships the head off to Mount Olympus. And then we also learn more about Annabeth and why she came to camp in the first place, and sort of her history with her dad and everything. It's kind of a little bit of a sympathy backstory for Annabeth that pays off at the end, but we also learn kind of why she doesn't trust people and why she is really attached to Luke from Camp Half-Blood as well. And we also learn that Grover has a dream of being a searcher, getting a searcher's license, because it's a satyr's dream to search for the long-lost satyr god Pan. And so Grover wants to also prove himself as well on this quest so that he can gain a searcher's license. So this more sort of middle chapters kind of set up the character arcs that we're going to get. And we also learn Percy's been having these dreams about a voice coming from the underworld, and it kind of reminds you of the connection that Harry has with Voldemort, with their connected dreams type thing. And it kind of gives you little hints and foreshadows things here and there that'll pay off towards the end. And then they stop off in St. Louis, and they go up the archway, and then they get attacked by a chimera, and Percy ends up taking them out, and then he jumps into the Mississippi River where he is healed, and then he receives like a message from like a water naiad or river naiad or something, and it's like a message to go to like Santa Monica Pier in LA. And so then Percy continues after the dreams, and I think he and Annabeth start to realize that it's actually the pits of Tartarus, which is very dangerous. And then the trio goes to Denver, and they meet up with Ares, the god of war, and then he sends them on what we think is like a side mission to this defunct water park to retrieve Ares' shield. And then the water park was actually a trap by Hephaestus to catch his wife, Aphrodite, and Ares in the affair. And then so they end up getting the shield out after fighting off some spiders. And then Ares gives them a backpack and also tells them to take this truckload of animals that's heading to LA. And that whole side thing with Ares, at first it feels like just a weird tangent, but actually comes back later in the book, and you'll realize what was actually going on there. So it introduces us to the god Ares, and so the trio then gets on this zoo, like animals that are supposed to be going to the zoo or something. They get on this truck. Grover can talk to animals, so they end up realizing these animals are poorly treated, and when they stop off in Vegas, they decide to free the animals, but then that leaves them stranded in Vegas. And so that's probably where we're going to leave off right now, because everything after the Lotus Hotel is the last half of the book, and it's where the climax really starts to get going. So these first few chapters really just set up the characters arcs and dreams and goals, and shows us how competent they are out on this quest fighting all of these different monsters, the Furies and Medusa and the Chimera and the spiders and everything. And it shows that they can work together and everything. And so it's a really good first half of the book. I think the first 5 chapters are a little bit slow going, just setting up Percy's just normal life. But once you get to Half-Blood, the book really, or Half-Blood Camp Half-Blood, the book really gets going, and it really picks up pace. And I really do just like this introduction to the whole world of the Greek gods and how they fit into society. We learn that Mount Olympus moves, but it's actually in the Empire State Building. above the Empire State Building in like a magic world or realm or something. And we learn that there's this thing called the mist that prevents normal humans from seeing all of this crazy magical. They don't see the monsters and the creatures and the weapons and everything. And it's a great way to set up this world and how it fits in with our modern world as well. I really like Percy as a main character. I think he's comes off, at least with his family life and his mom, as being quite sympathetic. I really like Annabeth. She comes off as being very smart and confident. And then Grover is just kind of a lovable character that shows his bravery because he's Percy's protector. And I really like Chiron, Mr. Brunner, as well. I think he's a good kind of mentor for Percy. And then I just like the little side characters. Dionysus is kind of fun. Clarice is a jerk, but also is kind of fun. Luke is... Well, we'll get to Luke in the last half of the book. And I like Percy's mom. She's very sweet. And his stepdad is terrible. So, yeah. So that's kind of the first part of the Lightning Thief, where we don't really know who the thief is. They keep saying it's Percy, but we know it's probably not going to be Percy. We know there's something else going on. There's this voice talking to Percy through his dreams. What's that about? They think it's all Hades is behind the whole thing, but we're starting to suspect that maybe he's not. And the prophecy from the Oracle tells Percy that he'll fail to save someone and that he'll be betrayed by a friend. And so we're kind of keeping those in the back of our minds, like, is Annabeth, is Grover going to betray him? Is he going to fail to save his mom? And so I think those are some good sort of things to keep in mind as we go through the book. And so, so I really like this first half of the book. I think it's got a lot of good stuff going. Like I said, once we get to Camp Half-Blood, we just take off on this journey, especially once we get to the quest. We're just, battling monsters and having a lot of fun doing it. And reading the book this time, I've seen the movie many, many times. But I've only read the Lightning Thief once prior to this. So reading it this time, I realized how many changes were made to the book or to the movie that aren't in the book. And so that is something to definitely look forward to pointing out when we get to the movie, because the book is it's really actually quite very different. And there were scenes in the movie that I thought were going to show up in the book. They don't show up in the book. It's only in the movie. So that's was kind of an interesting take on this. And so, I really like this first half of Percy Jackson, The Lightning Thief. So that's kind of my review of this so far. Part 2, we'll be reviewing the last half of the book. I'm doing this in different parts, otherwise this podcast would be like an hour long for each book. So we're doing it in smaller parts, and hopefully they'll be a little bit shorter. This one, it might be a little bit long, but hopefully the next few episodes will be a little bit shorter. So that's my review for the first half of The Lightning Thief. What do you guys think? Do you really love this book? Do you love Percy? Do you think Percy's annoying? I think maybe some people might, but I think I really like it. I'm not sure who my favorite character is yet. We'll have to wait and see. Maybe it might change throughout each book. I'm not sure. But that's my review. Let me know what you guys think. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. And stay tuned for the next episode, part 2, for the Percy Jack, Son of Poseidon podcast review of The Lightning Thief. Thank you.